Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Brian Williams, author of The Ultimate Sales Messaging System. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
Are you ready to get started?
Yes, I am.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
I'll say the biggest lesson that I've learned in this process is, A, to start, the question is they are currently writing the book, so they're doing that. And B, I would just say to continue. I think it helps to have a process, meaning you're going to write so many chapters per day or you plan to finish by a certain deadline. Starting it is the hardest thing, and then keeping a process and making sure that you finish it would be another. I think the second thing would be we were very intentional about really wanting to help the reader. And we're getting feedback now that shows that we actually executed that well. We wanted to make sure when they're done reading this book, they would have a very clear understanding that the message would be clear, compelling, and concise, so much so that they would be able to move from information to execution. And we're very intentional about that. So because there's so many books out there, and I think sometimes people write a book just to say you're an author, but I would challenge, since the question is those currently writing their book, to really take time and effort to genuinely help the reader so that they can do something differently as a result of reading the book.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing I always emphasize to my clients is your title is what grabs the attention, but your subtitle is what the reader is going to get out of it. So you have to make sure that subtitle connects perfectly with your book, because you want to give people value. You want to give something that's really going to help them in their journey.
Exactly. Totally agree. And I think that's a harder book to write, which is why I make the point. It would have been much easier to just say, let me just share some thoughts. I think that happens, but to put it in such a way, and we were really intentional about keeping it short, and that's a harder book to write as well. So we wanted to make sure it was clear, compelling, and concise, and that concise part was probably the hardest because we kept having to remove information. Oh, I think that's redundant. Oh, I think we can explain that with a story instead of these 3 or 4 pages. But people really appreciate that, so I'm glad we took the approach that we did.
Yeah, that is a great approach. That's the same philosophy I've had with my own books, where I emphasize it's not a bunch of fluff. We're going to get direct, we're going to get straight to the point, and it's a book that you can read on a flight from Dallas to Los Angeles. So it's going to be concise, clear, to the point, but it's going to give you great value in a short period of time.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
But what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Oh, wow. I mean, exposure, right? I mean, there's so many authors out there, and there's so much competition. I mean, why would they want to pay attention to me? What makes it different? So I think that would just be the most challenging part, is just the exposure required to get the attention of someone actually wanting to publish it, and then be able to convince and convey that this will provide value to the readers. And it's a different perspective, because there's nothing new under the sun, right? I think it's just people taking a different perspective on an existing approach, but that can be really interesting and compelling. So I think convincing others that this is it's the same thing, but a different take from a different perspective that readers would appreciate because it has a fresh perspective on it. I think, but doing that is difficult, but conveying the value of that, I think, is also a challenge in terms of getting published. And I think ultimately there's just so much competition because the barrier to entry has just dropped so low because of technology, that just getting the attention of publishers and letting them see that this is worth your time and effort, I think, would be the ultimate challenge.
And did you go through a traditional publisher, or did you publish the book yourself?
We looked at both, Paul, but I think we ended up doing it on our own because of the simplicity and speed in which we can get that done. But we did look at, and I have some friends or some colleagues, right, that took the more traditional approach. And at least from my experience talking with them, it sounds like it was a little bit more complicated than I was willing to entertain. But I'm sure there are other options, but the ones that I was exposed to, we decided to just do it on our own.
Yeah, I think the main thing is when you do publish it yourself is the fact that you have that control and you have the creative control. You get to keep the cover that you want, because a lot of time when you do go with traditional publishers, they get to control it. So they get the final say in your cover. They can change up your content. And that's one of those things where I always emphasize, if you really wanted to turn this into a business and build it, then if you want that creative control, the best way to do it is to either do it yourself or go through a publisher that's going to keep your voice and let you keep that creative control.
Yeah, and you know what? To your point, I heard that so I even have a semi-famous author that I talked to, and he made it quite clear that they pretty much took control over the book. And he had to fight in some cases on some of the content that they wanted to change, because he's true to who he is and the success that he's created, in the industry that he's in. And they were willing to just change it and make it more palatable to the market. But he was saying that the reason why the market appreciates my approach is because it is a different approach, maybe a little more controversial than most, but I think people are drawn to controversy. So ultimately, he proceeded to work with them, but he did mention that it was a bit of a battle to get them to agree on this one particular point that he wanted to make sure made it into the book. So I agree, it can be complicated. I'm sure there are other examples or options out there, but the ones that I heard just made me say, not this time.
Well, and plus the funny thing is, this is a good transition into our next question in a moment, is the fact that most publishers, except for typically Penguin or Random House, they expect you to do the marketing for your book as well. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, is the fact that even if you go traditionally published,
Right.
you are still expected to do a ton of marketing for your book.
I was really surprised by that, actually, how much work he ended up having to do just throughout the process, just how much heavy lifting was involved that he had to do. And I was thinking to myself, well, if I have to do all of that work, I mean, why should I? So anyway, I totally get the point. I learned a lot from the process. Let me say that. I would encourage anyone to ask lots of questions, right? Read articles, watch videos. I mean, I learned an awful lot through the process, and it was worth it, right? The journey that I went on was very well worth it, because I learned enough to kind of remove as many obstacles in that process as I could, and I'm really happy with the end result.
Yeah, my very first book did it 3 years ago, and I got the book done, got everything finished, and I realized, okay, now I got to find out how to get it formatted, how to get it edited, create a good-looking cover. Oh, and by the way, I got to market it as well. And so, just like you mentioned, I literally immersed myself in everything I could about publishing and about marketing for the entire month of July, and launched that book in August. Unfortunately, it became a bestseller and everything worked out nicely. But I mean, you have to put the work in, and you have to literally immerse yourself in it to learn as much as you can about those processes.
Yeah, because I think it's, I'm sure you probably preach this too, is writing a book is just one part of that process. There's so much more involved that I don't think you hear about when you see best-selling authors. You just see about the end result of success. But it's a definite process. I mean, it's like anything in life or in business, right? If you're looking for great results, it's gonna take a lot of work, and it's gonna take a lot of time and effort. Otherwise, everyone would be doing it. So yeah, I definitely learned a lot. And to be fair and honest, it was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. I mean, it was the amount of time and energy that it took. I was thinking, my gosh, edits and revisions and going back over it, and the right graphic, the resolution is not right, the picture won't fit on the page, it pushed the text to the next. Oh, man, it was, again, if you really want to put out a quality product and you genuinely want to help people, I think that's just a harder book to write. Because I went to this one, kind of boot camp deal, and they basically were just saying, put a bunch of content in and just ship it. Become an author in 30 days or 60 days or something like that. And it was a part of a workshop I was in. It was kind of like one of the modules. And I just really wasn't interested in that approach. I wanted to do something of quality that really helped people. I mean, he was even saying use large graphics and large fonts to increase the number of pages. I mean, just not the approach I was. I mean, I sat through it and listened, but did not take that approach at all.
Yeah, those are typically the companies I speak out against. Because I have that
Good
same.
for you.
Yeah, because that was one of the biggest reasons I got into publishing was the fact that there were people like that, and it's probably one of my biggest pet peeves, man. I know we're doing this on audio, but my head was shaking the whole time you were mentioning it. So I'm like, oh man, I hate those people that do that, because what happens is you end up having an inferior product, and then it makes that whole industry look bad. So if you are publishing yourself,
Right.
then you're not going to look good. If you do a 30-page self-published book and it's crap, it's going to fall into that Amazon rainforest. Invest a little money, have it done right, work with someone who has a system, and I'm not just plugging it for my own company, I'm plugging it for any publishers out there that they've got proven systems. Go with them, because you only get one chance to make a first impression. And if your first book is crap, then you're going to probably have to unpublish it. You're going to have to do a complete relaunch with a brand new second edition, or you're going to have to start from scratch. So the best thing is do it the first time and do it right. And that's what it sounds like what you did, and you had it done the correct way.
I would agree to that. If I could do it over again, I probably would have looked for a service like what you're doing, only because I didn't realize how much work it was going to be, how much time would be involved, even how to have it formatted so that it works on a Kindle, and then how to upload it. I mean, it was a lot more work. And we got it done, and I had some help. But again, if I could do it over again, I would get a resource that knows how to make that happen start to finish, only because you have no idea how complicated or complex that journey is going to be, because you've never taken it before, right? You just make the assumption, I have Microsoft Word on my laptop, I can write a book. That's such a small portion of that whole process. If you really want to, create value and create something of quality, it's a completely different ballgame.
Well, and Brian, you're in the Metroplex, right? DFW?
Exactly.
Yeah, so am I. I'm actually based in Arlington, and I'm going to bring up one thing that's real funny right now. Of course, it's not too funny because we're going to talk about the Cowboys because they had a rough start, and I know we're going a little bit off script here, but one thing that the coach of the Cowboys, or soon-to-be former coach of the Cowboys, always talks about is it's a process. And same thing with the Philadelphia 76ers. They talk about trust the process, and that's one of the biggest things I emphasize is it is a process. And it does take a while, and it's got, you have to do it right. But you're right, there's nothing really difficult, but there's just so many tedious things, and it all becomes a big process at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that because there's a process, there's more clarity. We're done with step 3. Next thing we do is step 4. Whereas I got to step 3 and went to 3.1, 3.2, and by 3.12, I was finally ready to go to step 4, because we went on this journey to try to figure out how do we land this plane so we can get to the next step. And I don't think you really value such a process until you've gone through something that I've gone through. That's why I'm a big advocate for, if someone were to approach me about becoming an author, I would just totally tell them. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there that do it, but I would find someone who can kind of help you walk through the process, only because you could spend a lot more time and energy on this than is necessary. Right? Yep. There's just an easier way to do it if someone's already created a path to make that happen. I choose that path next time around.
Absolutely. Let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you've used in your book launch that worked well.
Now, I honestly didn't know what I was doing when I did this, but it is working really well. And maybe it's because I am a professional speaker, but getting on stages and speaking and using the topic of the book as the title, or I should say the title of the book as my topic, that has been a huge push because it is a demonstration. Because I'm talking about the ultimate sales messaging system, I can be a demonstration of that on stage. And the assumption is, if he wrote the book and he's demonstrating it live, I want to get a copy of that book. And it works out quite well. In fact, I was in Boston last week speaking at Inbound, and, we sold out last year, sold out this year. And I think ultimately, and I didn't think about it until someone told me this, but ultimately they said, you were a live demonstration of what you were teaching on stage. And so it was very easy to believe that we can get to that level if we just follow the process, because we have a 6-step process, just like you were just talking about. And I demonstrate, 3 of those 6 steps because we don't have time to go through all 3, but I do share all 6. And I think it's easier for them to go from understanding to application based on, what's being shared and how it's being demonstrated. So for me, speaking in front of live audiences has been a huge push in terms of promoting it, because even those people who came tell other people who did not come. And obviously the book sells from there as well.
Well, not only that, also the back end too, with using that to leverage your speaking business.
Oh, absolutely. Because there was an event last year, and I had not finished the book yet, but they really wanted me to come speak, and we had actually started moving forward. And they said, okay, the only thing we need to do is order, I don't know, whatever it was, 200 copies of your book so we can give it to all the attendees. And I said, well, the book's not quite ready yet. And they said, oh, all of our speakers have to be authors.
Yep.
And I didn't know that. And so they literally said, we really like you, but we're going to have you come back next year. So that's the plan we're on now. But yeah, you're right. It qualifies you as an expert in your field, right? When you have when you've authored a book. And that's another reason why we really wanted to put something out of value and of quality. And the feedback that we get, justifies the hard work that we did to put it out there.
Yeah, I did a 3-minute talk at the Chamber of Commerce yesterday for Arlington, and they actually have this Business Over Breakfast event, so I got to give this speech. And I'm talking about the process and everything, but the main thing I brought in was this: what is the root word of authority? And fortunately, some of the guys have heard my talk before, so they immediately start yelling out, author! I said, exactly. Think about how you can take that and take that book and grow your business with it, because that's the one pillar with the Greater Arlington Chamber of Commerce, is to grow your business just like any other chamber is. And by having that book, it is a total game changer. When I started leveraging it for my public speaking gigs, we started at $500, and we've had that book, the price went up to $3,000 just by having that book and leveraging that authority. And that's just speaking at campuses. So I mean, it really is a game changer having that book.
Yeah, and I don't think I realized how much of a game changer it would be until when I started doing talks and they would want to buy a copy for each attendee. Now I just pitch that, right? And you can roll that into the fee. You can increase the fee. And so anyway, yeah, I didn't even think about that initially as I was writing the book, but ultimately as I start seeing the requests come through and how we began leveraging it at these talks and how they sold out every time, that's when I began to realize, like, this is a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. Because, you figure I'm just sharing what I know, so it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to you. But the keeping it simple and putting a process behind it, I think for us anyway, is what kind of got people's attention. And as a result, as you mentioned, we get on more stages, and as we get on more stages, we sell more books.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Oh, there's probably a lot. But I'll do it this way. I'll do the more recent one I read was Daring Greatly by Brodie Brown. And I think it's because as a business owner and a leader in business, vulnerability is not a weapon that I use often in my arsenal, but I've learned to do it a lot more in short order because of the freedom that it brought and how it makes you. We think that touting accolades draws people in, but that is just not the case, right? It's sharing vulnerability and failures and weaknesses. That's what connects you to other people. I don't understand the science or the psychology behind it. I just know that it works. In fact, a good friend of mine sold his company for about, at least his take was $12 million. And I remember we met for lunch, and you would have thought that guy would have just talked about the success and the money and but we talk, and he just shared all the struggles that he went through to get to the point to where he could sell it for what he did. And he had some real gut-wrenching moments, but it really drew me closer to him, and I respect him more, actually, right? Because, honestly, I can go online and read about the success of his company, right? I didn't really need him to share that with me over lunch. So in his wisdom, he just shared a lot of the challenges, how he overcame those challenges. It was very encouraging. And so anyway, I've kind of adapted that model for myself to just share. In fact, speaking last week in Boston, even on stage now, I do share, shortcomings and failures. And they're thinking, he's supposed to be the expert on stage. And why is he sharing that? Because it's true. It's reality, right? There's no perfection in this game. We all miss, even in professional sports, right? 30% at the three-point line or at slinging at the plate, you're top of the game, right? About 30% or so. That's a really low number. But so anyway, just that book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown, I'm sure many of your listeners have probably heard of her. But not just reading the book, but putting it into practice has, had a huge impact. I mean, not just in business, but my marriage and my relationship with my kids as well.
Well, and the great thing is she's a fellow Texan as well, so you can never go wrong with that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But yeah, you're right about sharing vulnerabilities. Last year, I was at a conference with my business coach, and he basically made all of us. We were trying to remember where we were. I think it was Santa Monica, and we actually it was Redondo Beach, and he actually made us all. Our assignment was to go outside and do a live stream on Facebook about our greatest fears. And we're like, seriously? He's like, yeah, I'm not going to let you back in the room. And there's people in this room that are being incredibly successful, multimillionaires, and they were all given the same marching orders. Go outside, share vulnerability. And I did it, and it was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever done. And I talked about fear of failure. And this was a few months after I left my job as a teacher. I was focusing on the publishing company. We're just getting through the startup phase into the growth phase. So I'm just talking about fears of failure, and it got an amazing reaction. And I had a lot of people comment or they sent me messages going, man, I really connected with that. Because people, they see successful people out there, but they want to hear about the struggles. I think that's one thing that Russell Brunson does best with ClickFunnels, when he talks about all his different struggles and all the things he had to overcome it, because it makes you human and it also puts you in their shoes. Like, okay, yeah, I was there. Then I can go to this point. I'm struggling now, but a few years from now, I'm going to get over it and I'm going to get to this point. And I think that's what makes the greatest connection with your audience.
Yeah, and it's kind of counterintuitive though, right? I think inherently we believe if I share these successes, I feel good, they will respect that. And that's part of it, but I think it's so rare that we're vulnerable, especially in business, right? I know I was in corporate America, we did a lot of business in Europe, and they have a very different approach. I remember one of the first meetings I was in, the opening slide was this guy had just got back from vacation, and he had like 2 or 3 photos of his family vacation in the opening slides. And I kind of looked around the room like, and I spent a lot of my time in Silicon Valley, right? It's hard charging, very competitive, right? Aggressive environment. And I'm like, why are we wasting time here? But then I learned over time to appreciate that, right? Not only did they share, these kind of very personal and in some cases vulnerable moments, but that's really rare in business. And it's cool to hear the reaction that you got, because I think one of the fears is that if we're vulnerable, we'll be kind of judged and stoned and looked down upon. But as you've already described, it's usually the opposite, right? We get the opposite of what we fear, and it just draws people in, and then they start sharing their own story, which is exactly what happened last week with the talk that I did. So many people came up and just shared their own version of the story. One lady came up and she was in tears, and another one wanted a hug, because we all have some struggle in our past, right? And I think when you share that, it just kind of connects you and makes you more human. Like you said, I follow Russell, met him a couple of times, and I agree he's as successful as he's become. He's real quick to kind of share struggles, as recently as something I saw him do just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's one of those things too where I always recommend to people that are writing the books too, put your heart and soul in it. And I've done 13 books now, and one of the books is probably the hardest one that I wrote, and it was called The Pursuit of Happiness. And that book was fairly dark, because I talked about fighting depression, I talked about being severely bullied growing up, I talked about my dad's alcoholism, and these are things that really took a deep dive into, and to this day that is probably one of my most successful books, and also one of my most well-reviewed books, because it connected so, and it was so powerful. But man, it was tough writing that book. It was tough.
And it was. No, I wouldn't doubt it for a minute. And I had a LinkedIn post that I did, and I was going through and found that it is by far the most read and commented. And it was just, I talked about how the lessons, I had a horrible marriage, and the lessons I learned from that had a huge impact on my business. And I go there, right? And I open up with how bad it was and why it was bad and what I didn't know and what I did. I mean, and it really just, to your point, just drew people in terms of comments. And I kind of shared, as a result, you know, these are some things that I've learned how to do differently after that experience, because I was making mistakes along the way and corrected them, and then realized, wow, you know, this applies in other areas of life, and I began to put those into practice. And but the opening part of the article is just sharing just a lot of struggle, and then it kind of merges into showing how I was able to apply some of those lessons learned to the business side of things. Then I kind of end with something kind of fun with how we restored the marriage for 23 years now, and when we do business together and it's all good. But man, it was a struggle getting to that point, without question. And I was a bonehead back then. My definition of being a good husband was whenever things weren't going my way, I'd quote some scripture in the Bible about you're supposed to submit. That's all I know. Submit. Why are you supposed to submit? So as you can imagine, that worked out really well.
Yeah, I'm sure that went over real well.
Oh man, I'm a lot wiser now than I was then, for sure.
That's one of the things we learn with age. And I'll freely admit, I was pretty much a hothead in my early to mid to late 20s. So now, you know, my early 40s right now, it's the biggest thing I think you learn over time is patience and understanding and realizing, wow, if I could just talk to that guy from 20 years ago, the things I would tell him.
Yeah, exactly. Totally agree.
Well, for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Oh man, it's something you know what? I would say this one. I would say, don't doubt during the darkness what God has already promised in the light. And I think for entrepreneurs, that just really speaks truthfully, because there are dark days, if people are willing to admit that. And it's in the dark days that people quit, give up, get derailed, or just, you know, stop pursuing it. But if you can keep that hope and keep the belief that you started this for a reason, it's what you're called to do, it's your passion. You know, if you don't doubt during the darkness and remember the promises that were given in the light, I think that quote has carried me through some tough times, because it does get tough. And as a result, it is by far my favorite quote.
Yeah, you're actually the first person that shared that quote on the show, and that is an awesome one. I keep thinking about this visual of a guy digging underground, and he's literally a foot away from all these diamonds, but then he just quit and walked away. And that's always kind of what that reminds me of. It's like, you're so close. Just don't give up. Just keep plugging, because all this work that you're doing, it's going to pay off, but it's not going to pay off if you quit.
Exactly. It's a tough, it's a tough one to, and you don't really realize it until you experience it. It's hard to just explain that truth to someone. I think you have to go through it and experience. I kept going, even though it got extremely difficult, and all of a sudden, right, I turned a corner and things just began to open up. And we hear these stories, but they're someone else's story. So I just think continuing to press through those dark, lonely moments, you'll be rewarded in the end. It's like persevering, right? If you just continue to persevere. And I think we hear that and it sounds cliche, but it's been very true in my life. And I think if you talk to any entrepreneur who's been in the game 5+ years, they'll probably, say the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. Really enjoyed it. What is the best way for people to find you online?
I would say either go LinkedIn. I'm really active on LinkedIn. If you just search, Brian Williams Perspectivity, it's like the word perspective, drop the E at the end, add ITY, or the website is perspectivityintl.com, as in perspectivityinternational.com. Either one of those two places I'm quite active on.
Well, I appreciate it. I've just been checking our time. This is our first episode out of the 97 that we've done now to go over 30 minutes. So this was an awesome show. I know we went a little bit off script, but this was a really great conversation. I appreciate you, talking about these things because, we all have challenges in life, and it's just great to have that conversation and talk about those challenges and how we can overcome them.
Absolutely. I really appreciate being on, and I appreciate your flexibility as well.
Hey, I appreciate being on the show. And again, I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.